At the Morrison Family Enterprises 100th anniversary gala, my husband, Arthur, forced me into a ridiculous dress, then publicly agreed when two executives called me a failure who only spent his money. I simply smiled, a lifetime of slights simmering beneath the surface. Now, watch what happens when they discover the useless woman actually owns 73% of their entire company. I'm excited to share my story with you. Please like, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. The dress hung on me like a cruel joke, a shimmering lavender monstrosity with ruffles that belonged on a teenager attending a 1980s prom, not on a woman celebrating her 42nd wedding anniversary at the 100th anniversary gala of Morrison Family Enterprises. Arthur had insisted on it. "It's classic, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice laced with that particular condescension he reserved for my fashion choices, or indeed any choice I might try to make for myself. "You need to look the part, distinguish yourself." What part, I wondered as I stared at my reflection, seeing only a caricature of fading youth and forced gaiety. An aging prom queen indeed. The phrase whispered through my mind, a precursor to the evening's humiliations. 42 years of company functions, of smiling politely while Arthur moved through the room, a shark in a tailored suit, only acknowledging those he deemed important people. I was merely an accessory, a silent fixture by his side, occasionally introduced as my wife Eleanor, before his gaze slid past me to someone more financially or politically advantageous. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt shimmered with crystal chandeliers, reflecting the opulence that Arthur had painstakingly built, or so he liked to claim. Tonight it felt less like a celebration and more like a machine, gilded but stifling. As soon as we arrived, Arthur, predictably, gravitated towards the cluster of younger executives, their faces bright with ambition, their wits clinging like designer handbags. I watched him from the periphery, a familiar ache settling in my chest. He never asked if I was all right, if I needed a drink, or if I wanted to meet anyone. My role was to be present and nothing more. I found myself drifting towards an empty table, observing the swirling dance of power and pretense. That's when Marcus Thorne, the vice president of operations, spotted me. He was a man whose ambition gleamed brighter than his meticulously polished shoes, and whose disdain for anything he considered superfluous was barely concealed. He had been talking to a small group of people, including Patrick Miller from accounting, when his eyes landed on me. A smirk twitched at his lips. "Ah, Mrs. Morrison," he announced, his voice carrying just a little too far, drawing curious glances. "Still gracing us with your presence, I see. Always good to know the company's profits are supporting certain lifestyles." He paused, a theatrical flourish. "It must be wonderful living a life of leisure with no responsibilities beyond, well, spending." Patrick Miller, ever the sycophant, chuckled. "Indeed, Marcus. What do you even do, Mrs. Morrison? Shop? Get your nails done? I imagine it's quite the full-time job, keeping up with Mr. Morrison's earnings." A ripple of discomfort spread through the small crowd that had gathered. Some looked away, embarrassed for me. Others stared with a pity that felt even colder than their scorn. My cheeks burned, a familiar flush of humiliation. I had faced such barbs before, but never so openly, so brazenly in a setting meant to celebrate. And then I heard it, a loud, booming laugh, closer than I expected. Arthur, my husband, who had just joined Marcus and Patrick, was laughing. My heart seized in my chest, a cold, hard knot. He looked at me, his eyes not apologetic, not even a flicker of concern, but cold and amused. He nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over my lavender dress, my flushed face. "They're not wrong, darling," he said, his voice carrying above the general murmur of the room. He addressed the small crowd, an expansive gesture with his hand. "I work, she spends. It's the natural order of things, isn't it? What else is a wife for?" A few nervous chuckles followed, mostly from those eager to curry favor with Arthur. The words, so casually delivered, hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just Marcus or Patrick. It was Arthur, my husband, the man I had stood by for decades, the man who had built an empire, scoffing at my very existence, reducing me to a decorative, useless ornament. A deep, quiet rage, cold and potent, began to simmer within me. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger, but the slow, steady burn of years of similar slights, insults, and dismissals finally reaching a boiling point. The dress, the neglect, the public mockery, it all coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. I had been underestimated for far too long. I took a deep breath, the anger clearing my mind, sharpening my focus. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the cheap fabric of the dress rustle. My heels, which had felt like shackles moments before, now felt like instruments of purpose. Click, click, click. The sound echoed surprisingly loudly on the polished marble floor as I began to walk, deliberately, slowly, towards the small group where Arthur stood, beaming with self-satisfaction. Their chatter died down as I approached, their smiles fading into confused frowns. I reached Arthur, placing a hand lightly on his arm. His laughter died in his throat. My smile, though tight, was sweet, utterly disarming. "Arthur," I said, my voice soft, but with an underlying steel that only I could hear. "Darling, come here for a moment." He blinked, surprised by my sudden assertiveness, but allowed me to guide him gently, subtly, towards the very center of the large ballroom. Heads began to turn, conversations quieted. Everyone, it seemed, sensed the shift in the air. The spotlight, for the first time in a very long time, was on me. I stopped, Arthur beside me, Marcus and Patrick now part of the wider, bewildered audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the remaining whispers, "I have something I'd like to share with you all this evening." I paused, letting the silence build, my eyes sweeping over the faces, lingering for a moment on Marcus and Patrick, and to answer some rather insightful questions raised earlier by Mr. Thorne and Mr. Miller. A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Arthur looked at me, a question in his eyes, a flicker of unease finally replacing his amusement. I took another breath, a small, triumphant smile touching my lips. "How does it feel?" I said, my voice gaining strength, echoing across the vast room, "to know that the useless woman you've all been laughing at, the one who supposedly only spends money and gets her nails done, owns 73% of Morrison Family Enterprises?" The silence that followed was absolute, shattered only by the distant clinking of silverware in the dining area. Arthur's face went ashen, his lips parted, forming a soundless gasp. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. From my small clutch bag, I slowly, deliberately, pulled out a thick stack of papers, crisp and official-looking. I held them up, letting the lights catch the embossed seals. "All signed, sealed, and legally binding." "Darling," I confirmed, my gaze fixed on his bewildered face. "My name is on every single one, and it has been for quite some time." And then the room erupted. The drive home was an exercise in suffocating silence. The usual hum of the expensive engine was drowned out by the sound of Arthur's ragged breathing, punctuated by his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. His knuckles were so white, they looked like polished bone. The lavender dress, which had felt like a costume of humiliation hours earlier, now felt like armor, heavy with the weight of untold truths. I sat beside him, watching the city lights blur past, a strange calm settling over me. The storm had broken, and now came the reckoning. The moment the car pulled into the driveway, Arthur killed the engine with a furious twist of the key. He burst out of the car, slamming the door shut. I followed at a more sedate pace, retrieved my small bag, and walked into the cavernous foyer of our home. Arthur was already there, shedding his coat onto the antique chest with a frustrated grunt. He spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "Explain yourself, Eleanor," he demanded, his voice thin with panic. The bravado from the gala completely vanished. "What in God's name was that? A joke? A cruel public joke?" I calmly walked past him, took his coat from the chest, and hung it neatly on the mahogany coat rack. Then I moved into the living room, a space we rarely used, reserved for formal entertaining. The air was thick with tension, with the ghosts of 42 years of unspoken resentments. I turned to face him. "There's nothing to explain, Arthur," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil that had once simmered within me. Everything I said was true. He scoffed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Impossible. My lawyers, the board, they would have informed me. There are protocols, regulations. You can't just own a company this size without anyone knowing. I walked over to the antique bar cabinet, my movements deliberate. Oh, but they do know, Arthur, I replied, pouring myself a liberal measure of brandy. My hands were surprisingly steady. The board, the lawyers, they've all been quite aware. In fact, the board reports to me. I took a sip, the warmth of the liquid spreading through me, a small comfort against the chill of his disbelief. He stared at me, his mouth agape. You, Eleanor, you know nothing about business. You've never even looked at a financial statement in your life. Your head is full of frivolous things, bridge clubs and garden parties, not ledgers and acquisitions. His words, meant to be an insult, were merely echoes of a past reality, a carefully constructed illusion. I took another sip of brandy. Perhaps it's time you learned some family history, Arthur. The real family history. He puffed out his chest, attempting to regain some semblance of his usual arrogance. My grandfather built Morrison Family Enterprises from the ground up. A true visionary, not like your middle-class nobody parents with their quaint little factory. My family has always been substantial, always at the top. I suppressed a sigh. Your grandfather, I began, my voice soft, almost conversational, was indeed a man of vision, Arthur. But by 1982, that vision was rapidly dissolving. He was about to lose everything. The company, the legacy you so proudly boast about, was hemorrhaging money. It was on the verge of foreclosure. Arthur's face contorted in disbelief. That's a lie. My grandfather left me a thriving business, a bedrock of the community. He never spoke of such troubles. He was a proud man. He was a proud man, I agreed, who built a beautiful facade to hide a rotting foundation. Do you know what the books truly looked like in the spring of 1982? $2 million in debt, 400 jobs at risk, suppliers threatening to pull out, the bank preparing to call in their loans. Morrison Family Enterprises was not thriving, Arthur. It was gasping for air. He stared at me, his eyes narrowed. How do you know all this? You wouldn't have had access to such information? You weren't even officially part of the family yet. I allowed a faint smile to play on my lips. No, I wasn't officially part of your family, but my father, you see, was far from a middle-class nobody. He owned Patterson Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it? A rather substantial company in its own right, specializing in industrial machinery and manufacturing components. Not as flashy as Morrison, perhaps, but considerably more profitable. He blinked, a flicker of something new, fear, perhaps, entering his eyes. Patterson Industries, I recall the name. A competitor, perhaps? Not quite, I corrected him. More of a silent giant. My father, bless his foresight, believed in equipping his only daughter for life. He left me a rather significant inheritance before your wedding, a sum of $12 million. A fortune that I, under his careful guidance, chose to keep quiet. I allowed everyone, including you, to believe it was merely a comfortable dowry, certainly not enough to be above my station, as you often phrased it. I watched him, relishing the slow dawning of comprehension, the dismantling of his carefully constructed world. And it was that inheritance, Arthur, that allowed me to discover the true state of Morrison Family Enterprises, just 3 weeks before our wedding day. And it was that inheritance that allowed me to save your family's legacy from utter ruin. He recoiled as if struck. Save it? How? Quietly? Anonymously? The question was steeped in a mixture of disbelief and a desperate hope that this could all be some elaborate misunderstanding. Not anonymously to everyone who mattered, I explained, my voice calm, the brandy warming my throat. My father's lawyers, discreet and efficient, set up a series of shell companies. These entities systematically bought out the company's crippling debt, one creditor at a time, ensuring that no single entity gained controlling interest too quickly. They then funneled funds into modernizing equipment, restructuring inefficient operations, and consolidating assets. All while your grandfather, and later you, remained blissfully unaware, believing you were turning the tide through sheer force of will. I watched as Arthur staggered back, almost tripping over a Persian rug. His face was a ghastly white, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. The carefully constructed image of his world was crumbling around him, brick by painstaking brick. I walked over to the built-in shelving unit, where his gleaming golf trophies stood in a proud array, monuments to his perceived athletic prowess. Reaching behind a particularly ornate silver cup, I pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio. It was old, the leather softened with age, but its contents were as potent as the day they were created. These, I stated, holding up the portfolio, are the original incorporation papers for Patterson Holdings, Investments, and Family Trust, all under my maiden name, Eleanor Patterson. His eyes widened, a dawning horror twisting his features. Patterson Industries? That was the silent partner? That was your family's company? The realization hit him, visible as a physical shock. The name, which had been a dismissive afterthought moments before, now held the weight of his entire crumbling empire. Indeed, I confirmed, opening the portfolio to reveal neat stacks of documents, financial records, and legal agreements. Every time you celebrated a new bank loan, every time you spoke of securing a crucial investment from an anonymous group of savvy private equity, that was my money. My shell companies, orchestrated by my father's trusted legal team, ensuring not a single penny or percentage point ever directly pointed back to Eleanor Morrison. I watched him, a part of me almost pitying the man who had been so blind, so utterly consumed by his own ego. So, all those years, he stammered, his voice choked. My grandfather's brilliant financial recovery, the one he supposedly engineered himself, that was you? You were pumping millions into a dying business. Yes, Arthur, I was. While you were still in business school, dreaming of taking the reins, I was the one ensuring there were reins left to take. I took another sip of my brandy, the liquid burning a comforting path down my throat. Your grandfather, to his credit, was a quick study. He understood the terms, the need for absolute secrecy. He swallowed his pride for the sake of the family name, a humility you, sadly, never quite mastered. His world, the one he had meticulously crafted and inhabited for over 4 decades, seemed to visibly collapse around him. Why, Waka Eleanor, why would you do this? Why didn't you ever tell me? 40 years, Arthur. 40 years of me thinking I was building this, leading it, succeeding. My entire life, my entire identity. It's all been a lie. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in a very long time, felt no warmth, no love, only a cold, quiet resignation. You never told me about the depth of the company's despair either, did you? You allowed me to believe the facade your grandfather built. As for why I never told you, I continued, gesturing around the lavish room, it was because of this, because of your pride, your love of being the successful husband married to the grateful little wife, the one who was always just a little bit beneath you, always looking up to you. A faint memory, like a distant echo, surfaced in my mind. I remember a conversation, Arthur, not long before our wedding. You were at the club with your friends. You were laughing, joking about marrying beneath you, but how useful it would be to have a wife who would be eternally grateful for the lifestyle you provided. You said it was good for a man's ego to have a muss who knows her place. I overheard it by chance through an open door, and in that moment I decided that my place, for the sake of your pride and the company's survival, would be a very specific one. I let the words hang in the air, allowing him to process the weight of them. I have been the majority shareholder, Arthur, for 40 years. Every major business decision you've made, every expansion, every acquisition, I approved it. Every strategic shift, every quarterly report, every hiring of a senior executive, it all came across my desk first. Those executives you believe report solely to you, they report to me. I have been pulling the strings at every board meeting, guiding the trajectory of Morrison Family Enterprises from the shadows. He shook his head, a pathetic sound escaping his lips. Did the other wives know? He whispered, as if the knowledge of my power would somehow be less humiliating if others had shared the secret. They knew only what I wanted them to know, I replied, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. That I was the devoted, carefree spouse, the one who attended bridge clubs, volunteered at the local charity, and enjoyed her spa days and book club meetings. I gestured vaguely towards the staircase. My home office, upstairs. The one you always thought was my little craft room, where I kept my sewing machine and knitting needles. It's where I have a secure connection to the company's servers, where I hold my video conferences and review contracts. My book club and spa days were often just code for discreet meetings with lawyers, accountants, and key personnel. Arthur's eyes, still wide with shock, began to dart around the living room, taking in details he had never truly seen. The second inconspicuous phone line installed years ago, the expensive, sleek laptop I often used, which he'd always assumed was for online shopping. The locked filing cabinet tucked away in a corner, which he'd thought contained my sentimental letters and trinkets. He finally looked back at me, his gaze hollow. Our entire marriage, he whispered, has been built on lies. Not lies, Arthur, I corrected him, my voice firm. Protection. I protected your pride. I protected your reputation. I protected your family's legacy. I ensured that the company not only survived, but thrived, growing into the empire you so arrogantly claimed as your sole creation. I finished the last of my brandy, the glass now empty, a symbolic end to a long, bitter chapter. The one thing I failed to protect myself from, however, was the humiliation, the condescension, and the casual cruelty from you and your colleagues. And tonight, Arthur, that finally broke me. Arthur stammered an apology, his voice still a reedy whisper. Eleanor, I swear I didn't know. If I had any idea, any inkling of what you'd done for the company, for our family, things would have been different. I would have shown you the respect you deserve. I merely gave him a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. No, Arthur, you wouldn't have. You would have found other ways to diminish me, to make yourself feel superior. You never bothered to truly see me, to recognize my capabilities. You preferred the narrative of the grateful little wife because it suited your ego. I turned and walked towards the grand staircase, my voice echoing in the now silent hall. But that's all over now. As of tonight, the pretense is over. Now, Arthur, you're going to learn what it really means to work for Morrison Family Enterprises. He stood frozen in the living room, a ghost of his former self, as I ascended the stairs without looking back. The next morning, the sun streamed into what Arthur had always believed was my craft room. To me, it was a sanctuary, a command center from which I had quietly run a $50 million enterprise for decades. The room, which he imagined filled with fabrics and knitting yarns, was instead lined with discreetly labeled filing cabinets, a multi-monitor computer setup, and a high-speed printer. The air hummed with the quiet efficiency of purpose. My first order of business was simple, a reckoning. I unlocked the filing cabinet marked Personnel Executive Level and pulled out the file for Marcus Thorne, the Vice President of Operations, whose public mockery had been the final bitter catalyst. I had always suspected Marcus was a shark, but I wanted evidence, concrete and undeniable. His file was thick, filled with performance reviews, mostly inflated thanks to Arthur's constant push for loyalists, and expense reports. I began to comb through the expense reports, cross-referencing them with company credit card statements and internal travel logs. The pattern emerged quickly, and it was disturbingly familiar. Lavish dinners at the city's most expensive restaurants on client nights, followed by hotel bills for business trips that often coincided with no recorded client meetings or conferences. The truth began to coalesce, ugly and obvious. These weren't legitimate business expenses. These were personal romantic getaways funded by the company. The fraud was blatant, audacious, and a direct insult to every hardworking employee of Morrison Family Enterprises. But the worst part, the part that truly made my hands tremble as I clicked through the digital records, was the discovery of the affair partner, Celeste Wong, Arthur's executive assistant, for 15 years. My stomach churned, not entirely from shock. I had suspected Arthur's infidelity for years, a quiet, nagging suspicion that I had compartmentalized, tucked away in a corner of my heart already hardened by neglect. But this was different. This was Celeste, a woman who had been in our home dozens of times, organizing Arthur's calendar, accessing his emails, even helping me with party planning on occasion. Her friendly demeanor, her cheerful efficiency, now felt like a venomous deception. I began printing everything. The suspicious bonuses, the raises that seemed to appear despite her consistently mediocre performance reviews. The company credit card statements detailing shared expenses with Marcus. I saw the trail, a blatant abuse of company resources, and I felt a fresh wave of nausea. It wasn't just the betrayal of our marriage. It was the sheer stupidity, the blatant disregard for consequence, the creation of an undeniable paper trail. Arthur, the astute businessman, had been so blinded by his own desires that he'd left a neon sign pointing to his transgressions. Then I found it. A memo from Arthur dated just last month. It was a promotion request for Celeste Wong to the position of Director of Executive Operations, complete with a staggering $120,000 salary increase and a share in the company's profit distribution plan. The language in the memo itself was suggestive, almost sickeningly intimate, speaking of Celeste's intimate knowledge of executive procedures and her personal commitment to the company's long-term vision. But the most infuriating detail, the one that made a cold rage flare in my chest, was the signature on the approval form. It was a clumsy forgery of my own name, Eleanor Morrison. He had forged my signature on a document that would grant his mistress a substantial promotion and access to even more confidential company information. The audacity, the sheer contempt he must have had for me to believe I would never find out. I printed every single document, meticulously arranging them into a chronological timeline. 15 years of an affair, systematic promotions, unwarranted salary increases, and gradually increasing access to highly sensitive company information. It painted a damning picture, a tapestry of deceit woven with company funds and personal betrayal. My phone rang, startling me. It was Arthur. "Eleanor?" His voice was strained, attempting a tone of conciliation. "Look, about last night, I think we need to talk. Properly. Come to the office, we can work something out. Arrangement." I almost laughed. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about recognition, about me finally wanting a seat at the table, a share of the glory. He believed I wanted an arrangement. He still couldn't comprehend that I had been directing his entire career, his entire supposed success, from my quiet little craft room all along. He had no idea what kind of arrangement I was about to propose. If you're captivated by Eleanor's story and eager to see how her meticulous planning unfolds, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single part of this incredible journey of revelation and revenge. An arrangement, you say, Arthur? My voice was calm, almost conversational, betraying nothing of the whirlwind of evidence I had just uncovered. Tell me more. What kind of official role did you have in mind for me in my own company? A consultant, perhaps? An advisor? I let a hint of feigned curiosity color my tone, baiting the hook. He cleared his throat, sensing a slight opening, a chance to perhaps smooth things over, to regain some semblance of control. Yes, exactly. We could create a new position, senior consultant to the CEO, perhaps. You'd have a salary, benefits, a proper office. You could advise me on all the important decisions. He sounded almost hopeful, still utterly oblivious to the depth of his predicament. Have you discussed this arrangement with Celeste, Arthur? I asked, my voice cutting through his tentative planning like a sharp knife. Or perhaps the new Director of Executive Operations wasn't aware that her promotion was contingent on my approval, the one you so deftly forged my signature on? A stunned silence stretched across the phone line. I could almost hear the blood draining from his face, his smug composure shattering. He whispered, How did I know? I finished for him, my voice devoid of emotion. Arthur, I review every expense report, every personnel file, every financial transaction. For 15 years, did you truly believe you could finance an affair with corporate funds, promote your mistress, and forge my signature on official company documents without me noticing? What kind of imbecile did you take me for? He weakly attempted to defend himself. It's not embezzlement, Eleanor. I have discretionary spending authority. These were executive perks. Executive perks? I scoffed, a dry, bitter sound. Those executive perks included romantic weekends in Napa Valley disguised as client development conferences. They included Tiffany's jewelry purchased as corporate gifts for non-existent clients. They included the rent for an apartment in the city, conveniently listed as consulting fees for a shell company that led right back to Celeste. I found every fraudulent expense report, every suspicious transaction, every lie you tried to bury in the ledgers. 15 years worth, Arthur. Enough evidence to not just destroy your career, but to bury you completely. The bravado was entirely gone now. His voice was raw, desperate. What do you want, Eleanor? What do I want? I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. You're not offering me a role in my own company, Arthur. You're begging me not to destroy your career and send you to prison. I paused, allowing the word prison to sink in. Let's be clear about what you're facing. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery, not to mention the sexual harassment charges that Celeste will undoubtedly bring against you once this all comes to light, unless she finds a way to disappear very quickly. The legal fees alone would bankrupt you, even if you manage to avoid jail time, which, believe me, you won't. No, please, Eleanor, no, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I'll end things with Celeste. I'll pay back every penny. We can go back to the way things were. Just give me a chance. Please. The way things were is over, Arthur, I stated, my voice chillingly final. What happens next depends entirely on your cooperation, on your willingness to help me clean house. Clean house? He repeated, bewildered. Yes. You see, Marcus Thorne, your loyal vice president of operations, has been rather creatively using company funds for his own romantic endeavors. And Patrick Miller, our esteemed head of accounting, has been skimming from the Employee Benefits Fund for the better part of a decade. All of this, Arthur, I discovered in my first hour of real investigation this morning. He spluttered, You can't just fire executives without board approval. It's protocol. Oh, Arthur, I sighed, a weariness seeping into my voice. Haven't you learned anything? I am the board, Arthur, or at least I control 73% of it. I've been giving the approvals all along, and believe me, the board will approve of a thorough house cleaning once they understand the full extent of the rot. I paused, my gaze drifting to the timeline of his affair, a stark testament to his foolishness. Now, I want you to come home, and I want you to bring Celeste with you. We're going to have an honest discussion about accountability. All three of us. The grand living room, usually a silent testament to opulence and quiet domesticity, felt like a sterile courtroom. I had rearranged the furniture, moving the plush armchairs into a stark triangle, ensuring no one could sit as an ally to another. My own chair, a high-backed fauteuil, I placed slightly forward, giving me a vantage point from which to look down, figuratively and literally. Arthur arrived first, his face drawn and pale, looking, as I had grimly thought, like a man walking to his execution. Celeste followed him in, her usual polished confidence completely absent. She wrung her hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She wore a simple, dark dress, a stark contrast to her usual vibrant wardrobe, as if already in mourning. Please sit, I said, my voice even, gesturing to the two armchairs facing me. They complied, shifting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with each other and with me. Let's be very clear, I began, my tone firm, businesslike. This is not a personal conversation. This is a business meeting concerning employee misconduct and financial impropriety within Morrison Family Enterprises. I paused, letting my words sink in. Celeste, I have your original employment contract here. I held up a thin yellow document. Signed 15 years ago, your starting salary as an administrative assistant, $32,000. Celeste swallowed hard. Yes, Ms. Morrison. And your current salary, Celeste? She hesitated, then mumbled, $95,000. $95,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. An almost 200% increase for an administrative assistant. An impressive trajectory, wouldn't you agree? My gaze sharpened. Can you outline for me, Celeste, the specific managerial responsibilities you've undertaken to justify such a dramatic increase? Which department heads do you coordinate with? What strategic initiatives have you spearheaded? Your listed duties, according to your job description, remain clerical and administrative, not management level. Celeste's eyes darted frantically to Arthur, a silent plea for help. Arthur, slumped in his chair, could only offer a weak, helpless shrug. Mr. Morrison, he asked me to take on additional responsibilities, Celeste stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. More high-level support, coordinating with clients, helping with his schedule. I turned my attention to Arthur. Arthur, as CEO, I expect a clear business justification for such significant raises. A $63,000 increase for what appear to be the same basic administrative functions. Please provide me with the documented performance reviews and strategic contributions that warranted this. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked utterly defeated. I didn't wait for his pathetic attempt at an explanation. Instead, I spread out a series of large printouts on the coffee table between us. They detailed Celeste's travel expenses. And then we have these, I continued, pointing with a long, elegant finger. Every business trip you took, Celeste, for the past 15 years coincided exactly with Arthur's. Often your hotel room numbers were consecutive. Convenient, wouldn't you say? Especially for separate business itineraries. More documentation followed, each page a fresh dagger. Dinners at the city's most romantic restaurants, charged to client entertainment, hotel spa services listed as business amenities. Tiffany's jewelry conveniently disguised as corporate gifts for key clients who mysteriously never received them. I pushed a thick binder across the table. This, Celeste, Arthur, is a methodical summary of 15 years of fraudulent expense reports, unauthorized salary increases, and the systematic use of corporate resources to finance a personal relationship. I leaned forward slightly. Do you both understand the legal implications of this? Do you understand the definition of corporate fraud and embezzlement? Celeste burst into tears, her composure finally shattering. He said it was all approved, she wailed, pointing an accusing finger at Arthur. He told me you knew about the raises, Mrs. Morrison. He said you knew about our arrangement, that you were fine with it. My gaze snapped to Arthur, a cold, predatory smile touching my lips. Is that what you told her, Arthur? That we had an understanding? That mine was a modern marriage and I wasn't interested in your personal life? Arthur finally found his voice, a pathetic whine. No, Eleanor, not exactly. I never said you approved the expenses. I told her you trusted me to handle financial decisions for the company, that you were busy with your hobbies. Celeste stared at him, her face crumpled in a mixture of heartbreak and outrage. You lied to me? She whispered, her voice choked with tears. You said she knew. You said she didn't care. I turned back to Celeste, my expression softening slightly, a deliberate manipulation. Tell me, Celeste, in all of Arthur's grand pronouncements about our arrangement, did he ever mention that I, Eleanor Morrison, actually own 73% of the company? Did he ever mention that it was my money, my family's legacy, that funded every single one of those executive perks, those raises, and indeed his entire career? The question hung in the air, slowly dawning on Celeste, replacing her tears with a horrifying comprehension. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, a betrayal far deeper than she could have imagined. Celeste was a wreck, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her earlier indignation replaced by palpable terror. Arthur, meanwhile, looked utterly helpless, seemingly unable to comprehend the scale of the disaster he had wrought. Celeste, I said, my voice calm and businesslike, cutting through her sobs. You have two choices. Choice number one, I press criminal charges for corporate fraud and embezzlement. You will face prison time, a ruined reputation, and a mandatory repayment of all stolen funds and unauthorized salary increases, which over 15 years totals approximately $430,000. Celeste gasped, choking on her tears. $400,000. I can't pay that. I don't have that kind of money. Precisely, I responded, unflappable. Which brings us to choice number 2, immediate resignation. In exchange for your silence and cooperation, I will absorb the unauthorized salary increases. However, I continued, pushing a document across the table, you will sign this repayment agreement for the $87,000 in fraudulent expenses you submitted and benefited from. And you will sign this non-disclosure agreement, agreeing never to speak of your association with Arthur or Morrison Family Enterprises or the circumstances of your departure. You have until 5 o'clock this evening to decide. My lawyers will be in touch. I placed a pre-prepared manila envelope next to the documents. Celeste, with shaking hands, reached for the papers. She looked at Arthur one last time, a desperate, heartbroken plea in her eyes. He couldn't meet her gaze, staring fixedly at the expensive Persian rug beneath his feet. She pushed herself up from the armchair, her legs unsteady, and stumbled out of the living room, leaving a faint scent of fear and cheap perfume in her wake. The door clicked, shut, leaving just Arthur and me in the silent, tense room. I turned my full attention to him, my gaze unwavering. Now then, Arthur, I said, my voice cutting through the lingering silence. Let's discuss your future with Morrison Family Enterprises. He swallowed hard, his eyes finally meeting mine, filled with a desperate, pleading look. As of today, I continued, you are no longer president. You are no longer an executive. In fact, you are no longer a manager of any kind. You are effective immediately, a mid-level employee with no authority beyond your specific job description. His jaw dropped. Eleanor, this is ridiculous. I built this company. I'm the CEO. You almost destroyed this company, Arthur, I corrected him, my voice sharp. I rebuilt it while you took all the credit. My protection of your reputation, your family legacy, and your bloated ego ends now. I leaned forward. You have a choice, Arthur. You can either work in a reduced capacity under direct supervision and with no hope of advancement, or you can resign and face the very same criminal charges Celeste is facing, plus the added charge of forgery for my signature. I assure you my legal team has a very comprehensive file on your activities. He looked at me, a flicker of outrage mixed with stark terror. This is insane. You can't do this to me. Oh, but I can, I replied, a chillingly calm smile on my face. And I am. Let's discuss the new organizational chart. There are going to be some significant changes starting first thing tomorrow morning. I picked up another printout. First, Marcus Thorne, your loyal vice president of operations, will be terminated for egregious expense fraud. His file is already with human resources. They'll be handling his immediate escort off the premises. Arthur's eyes widened. Marcus? But he's a vital part of the team. Vital to your little club of cronies, perhaps. Next, Patrick Miller. I paused, my gaze narrowing. Mr. Miller, our head of accounting, will be immediately transferred to a junior position in accounts payable, pending a full independent audit of the Employee Benefits Fund. I have reason to believe he's been quite generously skimming from our employees' future for a good number of years. If the audit confirms my suspicions, he too will be terminated and face criminal charges. You can't just move people around like that. Fire people. There are procedures, Arthur exclaimed, his voice rising in desperation. The board, I interrupted him, will receive my full report and recommendations tomorrow morning. And given my 73% ownership, I anticipate their swift approval. Which brings me to you, Arthur. I looked at him, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and cold indifference. You will be reassigned. Your new title will be Regional Sales Coordinator, Southwest Division. You will report directly to Felicity Green. He blinked, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over him. Regional Sales Coordinator in the Southwest? Who is Felicity Green? Your new boss, Arthur. And I think you'll find her management style quite educational. She's 28 years old, bright, ambitious, and utterly unburdened by the old boys club mentality you so cherish. Your starting salary, by the way, will be $65,000 annually, less than half of your current salary. A modest sum, perhaps, for a man who built this company. Arthur sank deeper into the armchair, his face a mask of utter defeat. The man who had mocked me hours earlier, who had reduced me to a useless accessory, was now utterly broken. He opened his mouth as if to plead, to protest, but no words came out. "Being my husband didn't stop you from treating me like garbage, Arthur," I said, my voice low and final. "It's not going to save you now." The next morning at precisely 7:30 a.m., I arrived at the gleaming glass tower of Morrison Family Enterprises. The early morning sun was just catching the reflective surfaces, making the building shimmer like a promise of a new dawn. I walked past the surprised security guard, George, a man who had seen me enter this building countless times as Arthur's decorative accessory, but never at this hour, never with this purpose. "Good morning, George," I began, offering a polite but firm nod. "I'll be working regularly now. And do note, Mr. Morrison is no longer in the executive suite. He's been reassigned to the Southwest Division under Felicity Green's supervision." George's eyes widened, but he merely nodded, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a professional solemnity. He'd been here long enough to understand that change was in the air. I walked directly to Arthur's former corner office, now mine. Overnight, a team of movers I'd secretly hired had transformed it. His golf memorabilia and awards were gone, replaced by tasteful modern art. The heavy mahogany desk had been exchanged for a sleek, ergonomic standing desk. My custom multi-monitor setup was already in place, humming softly. My new assistant, Brenda, a sharp-witted woman of 62, with 3 decades of experience at Morrison, met me at the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison. The department heads are assembled in the main conference room as requested." Brenda had been discreetly in my employ for years, an invaluable set of eyes and ears within the company. "Excellent, Brenda. Thank you." I reviewed my notes one last time. I knew the announcements I was about to make would send shockwaves through the entrenched boy club culture of Morrison Family Enterprises. But it was a necessary tremor, a seismic shift required to finally bring the company into the 21st century. I walked into the conference room where a dozen faces, predominantly male, and ranging from bewildered to openly hostile, looked up as I entered. I walked straight to the head of the long mahogany table, the chair Arthur had always occupied, and sat down. "Good morning, gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and authoritative, silencing the nervous murmurs. "And ladies, as of this morning, I am the new CEO and president of Morrison Family Enterprises." A ripple of shock went through the room. Marcus Thorne, ever the arrogant one, recovered first. He leaned forward, his face flushed. "Where's Arthur? He's the CEO. What is this, Eleanor?" "Mr. Morrison," I replied, my voice cool, "has been reassigned to Regional Sales Coordinator, Southwest Division. He will be reporting directly to Felicity Green." Marcus scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Reassigned? Without board approval? This is ridiculous. The board would never approve such a move. As the majority shareholder of Morrison Family Enterprises, holding 73% of the company," I stated, my gaze locking with his, "I am the board of directors, Mr. Thorne, or at the very least, my vote carries significantly more weight than yours." I paused, letting the implications sink in. "Which brings me to you, Marcus. Effective immediately, your employment with Morrison Family Enterprises is terminated for gross misconduct, specifically fraudulent expense reporting." Brenda, standing discreetly by the door, stepped forward and placed a neatly tabbed binder in front of Marcus. "All documentation is here, Mr. Thorne, detailing years of misappropriated company funds. Security will escort you from the premises after you've cleared your desk." Marcus's face went from flushed anger to ghastly white. He stammered, tried to protest, but the evidence was undeniable. He rose, his chair scraping loudly, and was quickly, efficiently, escorted out by 2 security personnel who had appeared at the door. The remaining executives watched in stunned silence, a palpable fear now mixing with their shock. "Next," I continued, turning to Patrick Miller, who had visibly blanched. "Mr. Miller, your role as head of accounting has been revoked. Effective immediately, you are transferred to a junior position in accounts payable with a corresponding salary reduction, pending a full independent audit of the Employee Benefits Fund. Should any irregularities be confirmed, further disciplinary and legal actions will be taken." Patrick, clearly intimidated by Marcus's fate, merely nodded, his face pale and clammy. Now for some positive news, I announced, my voice brightening slightly. I am pleased to announce several new promotions, effective today. Felicity Green, your new Senior Vice President of Operations. Sophia Ramirez, our new Vice President of Finance. And Charlotte Davies, who will head our newly established Strategic Development Department. Three women who had until now held mid-level positions exchanged stunned, joyful glances. I watched the reaction of the remaining male executives. Several began whispering furiously, their faces etched with anger and disbelief. I hoped, truly hoped, they were planning their rebellion, contemplating their resignations. It would make the house cleaning so much easier. Felicity Green, a sharp and confident young woman, stood up. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. I won't let you down." "I'm confident you won't, Felicity," I replied. A word of caution, however. "Arthur Morrison will be reporting directly to you. I trust you can handle him?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Felicity's lips. "I can handle Arthur Morrison, Mrs. Morrison." Her confidence was a breath of fresh air. Just before noon from my new office, I saw him. Arthur. He stood in the parking lot staring up at the building, a small figure utterly diminished. He lingered for a long moment, perhaps trying to reconcile his past with his new reality, before slowly, reluctantly, making his way inside. I knew that soon the Southwest Division, a floor below, would erupt in a commotion as the former CEO discovered his new, accountable, and thoroughly supervised position. The new order had begun. At precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon, the door to my new corner office burst open without a knock. Arthur, his face a mask of rage and indignation, stormed in, his eyes blazing. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? You can't treat me like some junior employee. This is my company, my legacy." I calmly looked up from the quarterly report I was reviewing. "Arthur, you nearly destroyed this company, and it is no longer your company. If you continue to disrupt the workplace, I will call security and have you escorted out. Now, what can I do for you?" He spluttered, gesturing wildly. "I'm reporting to that child, Felicity Green. She's young enough to be my daughter. It's an insult." "Felicity Green," I corrected him, my voice cool and even, "is a highly qualified and exceptionally competent executive who has consistently exceeded her targets. Unlike you, she leads with integrity and a genuine understanding of the market, not with inflated ego and fraudulent expense reports." He slammed his hand on my desk, making the papers jump. "I demand loyalty. I demand respect for everything I've given you." My gaze hardened. Loyalty, Arthur? Respect? The man who laughed at me last night, who publicly dismissed me as useless? The man who forged my signature to give his mistress a promotion while embezzling company funds to finance his tawdry affair? You gave me a lifetime of condescension, betrayal, and humiliation. You gave me a lesson in just how much a woman can endure before she breaks. His face flushed, the anger slowly draining away, replaced by the profound humiliation of being confronted with his own despicable actions. He stood there for a long moment, defeated and exposed, before turning and walking out, the door closing softly behind him. He didn't return to the office for the rest of the week. On Friday afternoon, Brenda walked into my office, a discreet smile playing on her lips. "Mrs. Morrison, a package for you." She handed me a crisp white envelope. Inside, I found 2 documents. Arthur's resignation letter, citing irreconcilable differences with new management, and divorce papers served by his own legal team. I felt a profound sense of relief, not devastation. The heavy weight of a dead marriage, a life lived under a false pretense, had finally lifted. I called my lawyer immediately, not to fight but to ensure my assets, and more importantly, the company, were fully protected. The divorce would be swift, clean, and entirely on my terms. 6 months later, I stood on a brightly lit stage, the keynote speaker at the Regional Women in Business Conference. The roar of applause as I was introduced as Businesswoman of the Year was exhilarating, a sound I had never imagined would be for me. I looked out at the sea of faces, mostly women, some young and eager, others older and battle-scarred, and I felt a connection, a shared understanding. For 42 years, I began, my voice strong and clear. I lived in the shadows. I allowed myself to be publicly humiliated, dismissed, and underestimated. I believed that silence was golden. But I've learned, dear friends, that silence is not golden. It's toxic. It allows the rot to fester, the injustice to prevail. I spoke of reclaiming my voice, of stepping into the light. I detailed the consequences for the architects of my past misery. Arthur, my ex-husband, is currently a regional sales manager in a small district in Ohio. He's learning the true meaning of accountability. Marcus Thorne is appealing a fraud conviction, his once promising career in ruins. And Patrick Miller, he's a junior accountant in a small firm, reporting to a 26-year-old woman with a keen eye for detail. I shared the company's transformation, a 32% increase in profits in just 6 months, sky-high employee satisfaction, and a leadership team that was now female majority, with full pay equity and promotions based solely on merit. As I scanned the audience, my eyes met those of Mrs. Wong, Celeste's mother. She gave me a small, respectful nod. I knew from Brenda that Celeste was now an administrative assistant at a law firm, diligently repaying her $87,000, a hard lesson learned. It's never too late to stop hiding, I concluded, my voice resonating with a conviction. It's never too late to claim your power, to demand respect, and to build the life and the legacy you truly deserve. The standing ovation that followed was deafening, a tidal wave of affirmation that washed away decades of unspoken pain. Later, a young woman, her eyes bright with ambition, approached me. My CEO's wife, she confided. She seems so trapped. She reminds me of how you described yourself. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Tell her to call me, I said, handing her my card. Tell her I'm offering her permission to stop hiding. As I left the conference, the city lights twinkling around me, I realized that Arthur's cruelty had not been a curse. It had been a gift. It had given me the freedom to finally be my true self, to step into the power I had always possessed, and to build an empire that was truly, finally, my own.